I still stand by today. One of the best musicians that I know and have ever worked with is a retired accountant from Floyd County, Kentucky.
Hello and welcome to the Keyboard Chronicles, a podcast for keyboard players. I'm your host, David Holloway, and as always, I'm super pumped to be here with you. I've got a bit of a different one for you this episode. The focus of our episode is the amazing Mr. Kory Caudill. As you'll hear, Kory is a much sought after performer based out of Nashville, grew up in the area of Kentucky and particularly in the Appalachia area, which has been a huge influence on his music and his upbringing and just his career to date. And so we talk a lot about that, about some of the amazing artists he's worked with. And we also had the privilege of being joined for part of that by Mr. Steve Nathan. For long-term listeners of the show, Steve Nathan we had on the show quite a while ago now, probably 2 years ago, and we did a two-part with Steve. Steve was part of the Muscle Shoals crew towards the latter stages of Muscle Shoals, and cannot recommend highly enough listening to Steve's interview as well. Steve is the person that suggested Kory, and I thought it was a great opportunity to have someone that is a veteran Nashville session player versus Kory, who is a more emerging Nashville-based player who's also had more of a focus on performance. So it's a nice little mix of thoughts and discussion in there, and I think you'll enjoy it a great deal. So I'll shut up now, let you jump into it, and I'll talk to you at the end of the show. Kory, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, sir, and thank you. I know you're not in your usual home territory. You're on the East Coast in the New York area at the moment. How are you doing today?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I find myself rarely in my home territory. Like we're doing great. We're doing some shows with Tyler Childers at Forest Hill Stadium in New York today and tomorrow. So I've never been. I've heard nothing but great things. Got a few fellow musicians who are local coming out, and so it's just going to be a big family time up here.
Excellent. And so there, let's talk about your last year or so, and a lot of that's been with Tyler. Just tell us about how busy you've been over the past year touring with Tyler, and then some of the highlights of that, and yeah, just how it's been for you.
Well, thank you for asking. It's really hard to talk about because it's so cool. I feel like I'm 15 and I got to join my favorite band, and it's really a pocket of the music industry, and so that I didn't think would ever exist again. And we're getting to do it. And not only are we getting to do it, we're all, for the most part, local boys from East Kentucky, West Virginia, and we found ourselves in Australia for the whole month of March this past year. And we've been at beach houses recording records with Rick Rubin. And those aren't things that you expect to get to do when you grow up in the hills of East Kentucky. And here we are. So it's a really loaded question. Musically, it kind of saved me. I mean, I was always happy with what I was doing in the music industry. But as far as Nashville goes in the studio scene, that had turned into something that in hindsight was getting tougher and tougher to be part of. So when Tyler and a couple, Jesse Wells, our fiddle player, when they called, I was just elated because I fell in love with country music at an early age, but I love classical and jazz and bluegrass and fusion, all these things, like most musicians do, but we actually get to apply all those things out here. So when would I ever get to play country music? They're set in a format where a set list is different every night. There aren't click tracks. If somebody is soloing, Tyler will turn around and say, eat you a little more right there. It's kind of like I get to be part of the Grateful Dead, except with my hillbilly friends.
I love it. And so is that what you mean, Kory, when you said you're getting to do a pocket of the music industry that you never thought you would have? It's that really organic family atmosphere. Is that what you mean by that?
That's one way that I mean it. But a good way to explain it would be, if you're familiar with a Nashville numbers chart in a session and you're going down and you're in there with a group of your fellow musicians and you're in, say, a 10-to-1 session, the chart will read down intro, verse, chorus, turn, verse, chorus, break, down chorus, out, whatever. It says break because in Nashville and the studio scene, it is that. It is a break between what's happening in the vocal performance. It's a dynamic break and everything. Well, with Tyler, there aren't breaks. Every little component is a part of a story, and everything is thought out. And their guitar picker CJ, he'll say he's a thinker, and so to get to play music live and record in a way where every little thing is part of the story, as opposed to just, well, who wants a solo? Okay, take it. And that's not a knock on that process too. That's a really cool way of doing it. But for me, getting to actually compose solos after having conversations about what the song is about, and having Mr. Rubin in there or Nick Sanborn in there say, I think here's what we're trying to go for. Now, how do you tell this story for 20 seconds with whatever keyboard is at your disposal? And oh, that sound ain't weird enough. Twist some knobs and stuff. And you're just kind of pitching yourself going, this is country music and this is so cool.
That's
So
amazing.
I guess for me, it's a pocket of country music that is still true to storytelling.
Yeah, no, gotcha. And so when you say you were part of the recording process in beach houses, are you saying the Rick Rubin recordings were in Australia or in beach houses over there?
Renovated. We outfitted a beach house in Kauai, and we holed up there for a couple weeks, and the hillbillies come to town for a little bit, and but it that part was fascinating too. Some of my mentors had it told me about their heydays of being in some of the world's biggest bands and what it was like to record. And they're like, yeah, there's kitchens there and you would just stay on site. And I'm like, no way. And like, yeah, you just never left. You just stayed in the music and recorded. And I'm like, that is just, I can't fathom that. And we did it. It was too cool. The other half of the record was recorded at Shangri-La in Malibu. So it was uh, same concept. Is still a really nice outfitted house, where you're meant to just be submersed in the music and kind of in a bubble away from all the external factors. And oh my gosh, what comes out of that is so much different than the typical Nashville recording process.
Yeah. And so I can't let you get away without asking about Rick Rubin. Obviously, he's an icon as far as a producer. Behind me somewhere is sitting his book that I've obviously read. What did you learn, if anything, from Rick during that process? And did you actually get much interaction?
Process is something that I've learned in my old age to keep a lot of it personal because it's such an intimate thing. And at the same time, I love talking about it because we got to go record with Rick Rubin. But some of those things were so special that they're supposed to live there and stay there. I think there are things that I learned and then things I admired and appreciated. One of the things that I appreciated was he had a really deep admiration for Appalachians and Appalachian culture and for Appalachian music. And I also appreciated how often he said, I don't know, let's go find out.
Yeah.
And he never put us on the clock to find out what that was. And he did a great job at setting the environment in a way to where we weren't afraid to mess up. And it was full of inspiration, freedom, creativity. Just he really set the tone of a room. And there are parts of him that you just can't describe.
Yeah.
There are part of me is kind of convinced that some spirit from outside of Earth hijacked his body and is controlling it, because sometimes he'll say and do the same things that other people might, but it's different with him. And that, I can't really go into any more detail and make sense of it because it's just different. But he was just a wonderful human to be around. And for me as a growing producer, it was great to be around someone with his style, because my style is a lot more technical. It's a lot more arrangement based and details and, scoring out parts and a little bit of hands on gear and those kind of things. Well, his approach was a whole lot more to do with setting the tone for a room and getting to the bottom of your why. What's your purpose? Why are you doing this? And so I living that, I hope, has really filtered into my own approach.
Yeah. No, great answer. And so you mentioned that Rick was very interested in sort of your history and your upbringing. So let's talk a little bit about that. So just talk us a little bit about your how you were raised in rural Kentucky and living in the Appalachian area. Um, and obviously as an Australian, I'm a little bit ignorant on the exact geography of it, but I've seen some great documentaries, and I know what a proud history, with mining and the culture that exists in those areas and so on. Just fascinated about your upbringing and what led you to music.
Yeah, well, I love the opportunity to talk about that, and you're probably familiar with it as well with some of the coal mining areas
Yeah.
in Australia. We got to see some of them, and it kind of looked like being in Pike County for a second on the other side of the world. It was really nice, and I, you hear folks talk about their hometowns a lot and how it inspired them and I'm very biased, and I do like to think that the Appalachian and the East Kentucky upbringing is a little bit unique, musically, especially because I grew up there before social media was a thing, and it was still isolated. Uh, Geographically, it still is isolated. There's no major interstates running through there. You're 2 hours from being connected to what we call the outside world, really. Well, because of that, the musical traditions had remained untouched and pure, and there's a spiritual connection. Religion or the details aside, there is a very tangible spiritual connection to music in the area, and a lot of that is church based. My grandmother and her dad, my great grandfather, they were church musicians, but I think one of the things that folks remembered about them a lot is they would go into kind of trance states, and my grandmother, people would say, yeah, she'd play in the spirit. And that spirit is unique to that region. And I think that what they've gone through in their way of life was vital in sculpting that. My grandparents uh, came back from fighting World War II and went straight to the coal mines. So you're talking about generations of people who powered the entire nation, with very little to show for it, often in unregulated environments. So by God, when those folks took to an instrument to play, the stuff that come out reflected those experiences. And so you get a lot of angst, you get some beautiful storytelling, you get this bluegrass stuff that's got an edge to it. It's so on top of the beat while it grooves at the same time. So um, translate all of that to my bringing in the 90s and the early 2000s, when folks like my parents were actually very active in making sure that the region had resources that it typically wouldn't have, access to performing arts centers, to state of the art recording studios. And this is in areas that are in poverty. You wouldn't expect to have these kind of things. And those facilities gave folks like myself, Tyler, and a lot of the musicians that you see and hear out and about, it gave us a chance to discover who we are as musicians who descend from that culture.
And so how hard was it, Kory, to move from that area to getting into music professionally? So your teenage years, and I do want to talk about your dad later too, because he plays a pivotal role in your life and he's an amazing musician in his own right. So how did you move from being a child to a teenager, and dealing with music and then deciding to do that for a living?
Well, mentally, I'm probably still, I would consider myself a teenager or a child, but, um, and that's really funny too, because we grew up around such great musicians. I still stand by today. One of the best musicians that I know and have ever worked with is a retired accountant from Floyd County, Kentucky. And these were all folks who were part of big records at some point, but they didn't want to leave home. They wanted to raise their families where they were attached to back there. And there's such a strong attachment to it. So um, we were fortunate to have access to very, very legitimate studio players in this little tiny 50-mile radius in Eastern Kentucky. So I would grow up around them, and I remember thinking, "Oh my gosh, if that's how they are in Prestonsburg, Kentucky, there is no way I can hang in Lexington, let
Yeah.
alone Nashville and everything." So honestly, musically, I I was very lucky, and I was equipped a whole lot more for the move than had I been raised anywhere else. Um, Culturally, is where the shock probably came in. People tell me I talk like I have rocks in my mouth. So so that, but I musically, the move was actually pretty seamless thanks to all of the opportunities we had back there.
Yeah. And so I've got to ask, you mentioned one of the best musicians you worked with was an accountant. What was it about them and what were they playing? What instrument they were playing that just absolutely blew you away?
Yeah, it's a guy named James Whited. He's a guitar player, also a phenomenal keys player, phenomenal sax player. In his retirement, side note, I found out that he moved to Florida, and he played in a band for I think 2 years and only played sax, and they didn't know that he played guitar at all. And he's the best guitarist I've ever heard in my life. So, um, and it wasn't about, once you hit that level, it's less about the the little short snippets of things you see when somebody sits down and picks up the instrument. It's about how he drives a session. And it's about how he's able to communicate with other musicians and inspire and make other people better. And if you're not up to his level, he will get you to his level, or he'll be really pissed at you if you don't. And there's nothing musically that he was not capable or is not capable of. And there's no genre that he wouldn't be able to sound authentic in, because he's been a student of all those, and he's highly intelligent, and he has a mathematical brain, so he processes things um, differently than a lot of musicians might. But you couple all of that, this just high IQ, uh, this ability to communicate very directly and inspirationally with an Appalachian upbringing, and he was always on top of technology too. And I always appreciate there was a handful full of folks back there who did not let the geographical barriers keep them from having the hippest gear and stuff. So that was a big deal. Being able to go into a session and watch somebody pull out the sounds that you hear on the radio and do the things that you hear and see on MTV or whatever. And so, yeah, I guess to summarize, it's always been less about how just ridiculously accomplished he is with his facility and everything, and more just about how much he knows and just becomes music when he picks up an instrument.
Kory, that's probably a good juncture to bring in the brilliant Steve Nathan. Steve, it's wonderful to have you here, sir. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. I'm feeling so far from brilliant at this moment. So I realize it's a cultural. It's a term used often in your neck of the woods, but right now I'm barely here.
Yeah, barely here. No, look, we're
Working
very
on,
glad that you're here. No, we're very glad that you're here. And I know you and Kory haven't met face to face, but you obviously are aware of each other. So we're just going to sort of, you and I, tag team with Kory as we work through the rest of his career. So, Kory, you were just mentioning, about the transition to Nashville being relatively seamless. And Nashville is such a melting pot of so many great musicians. You didn't have to deal with any prejudice around the fact that you're from Appalachia. And the reason I ask that is in Australia, in England, in Canada, in Asia, rural people and city people have stereotypes about each other. I'm a country boy and I understand it only too well. Did you have to deal with any of that moving to Nashville, or it is so accepting that wasn't really an issue?
Well, to me, the cultures weren't too terribly different, aside from one just being an urban culture. But now, um, there are a lot of assumptions folks make when they hear me talk, and a lot of them are probably right. But it would be wrong of me to talk about um, any sort of bias or prejudice or those kind of things that I would because I've experienced none. Now I do have some dear friends with very different backgrounds than me who have experienced that, and that's a whole other whole other thing. But thankfully for folks like myself, enough hillbillies had come before me and paved the way that you can hear me talking. He's probably safe.
Yeah, that's right. Now, I've got to ask, and this, I don't mean this in a funny way. I'm actually fascinated. What is your definition of a hillbilly? Because what I think of as a hillbilly in Australia is probably not even close. What do you define as a hillbilly?
Um, Hillbillies are the ones, we'd be the ones in the wrestling match, and a redneck would be betting on the match.
I love that. That is seriously one of the best responses I've ever heard. I just love that. Thank you. That's a great definition. That might be going in the intro, Kory. No, great answer. And so your move to Nashville, was that when you started your studies at Belmont University? Was that sort of the segue for you moving from your home area?
Yeah, it was. Some of the more influential people in my upbringing had always recommended to me to find the teacher more than the school. And I probably would have went to Morehead State. There was a guy named Jay Flippin who was there, who had taught a lot of folks who are out in the industry right now doing things that I'd aspired to do. I'm catching one of them while I'm here in New York, a guy named Jeff Kazee. I don't know if you ever worked with Jeff, but Jeff is, yeah. But Jay was a catalyst for a lot of those folks. And Jay retired as I was entering college. And enough people recommended I go down and link up with Bruce Dudley at Belmont. So I went there. And when I did get to Belmont, the facilities were just night and day hipper than anywhere else that I saw. I mean, just the studios, the keyboard labs with all the outboard gear, and so everything about it was right for me. There are also folks that I worked with at 18 when I moved to town who were probably better off diving right in, and they were a lot more prepared. As a musician, I probably had some dexterity and some things that were hip enough to probably got me a little footing in the scene, but probably would have got me in trouble. So Belmont for me was a safe place to go and screw up a lot without it costing me reputation or money.
Yeah, that's right. And before I get some thoughts from Steve, I haven't asked the obvious question. You mentioned in your upbringing, working or seeing all these wonderful musicians. Why was it the piano or keyboard that you ended up choosing as your instrument of choice?
That's a good question. We had a lot of instruments in the house. My family actually owned a music store for a long time, so I had access to everything, but the keyboard was what translated into all those. And my dad was he was heavy into Roland gear and sequencers, and just he was always at the forefront of technology. So to me, I think I fell in love with the sequencer on the keyboard that was in the house just as much as I did the piano. But I also really liked the dynamic range of the piano quite a bit. I love being able to sit down and just play as soft as you could, and then it would play that back to you if you're on an okay piano. Same with the organ. I was lucky enough to grow up with a Hammond in the house. And as Steve will probably tell you, to have access to it and not just have to go when you're at the studio and play, because it's just a whole different style, and to have access to that at a young age was pivotal.
Your dad is a Hammond player, isn't he? Was he not?
Yes, sir. Yeah, church Hammond player, and also a unique musical upbringing too, because he didn't know until he said like late 20s that you could cross your thumb under when you play it. So he was playing all these great things, hadn't really unlocked the cheat codes yet.
Yeah.
So and that it's a cool style too, because they grew up Pentecostal, and it's the funniest thing because they groove so well, all while the timing is all over the place. My granny would start a song, she said, "Okay, 1, 2, 3, go," and just point at you and say, stay with me, and just somehow it grooves great. But it's a really, really soulful, genuine, heartfelt approach to the Hammond. It's not the typical gospel thing you might see on YouTube with these cats that I really love to watch. It's just it's kind of almost a country approach to what I would otherwise consider a black gospel instrument.
Now, to double back to David's question about why did you choose keyboards over other instruments, I tend to think that the instrument chooses you, not that you choose the instrument.
That would make a lot of sense in my experience. much better way to put it, but I'll fully agree with you.
Yeah.
My dad.
Did something happen for you that makes you think that?
No, my dad played piano, and there was piano in the house, and that's obviously where I started as a young player. But I think it's at some point there is what I liked about the piano was its ability to play everything in every range, to cover all. It could be everything and not just a part of something. Um, I was and I was decidedly not particularly interested in being a solo piano player. I grew up way more fascinated by the sound of an orchestra than I did a single piano player performing. And I think
Yeah.
the keyboard lends itself to that mentality.
And Steve, I'm interested, as I said, I know you two haven't actually met, but it's thanks to you that we're actually talking to Kory tonight. And before we started recording, Kory alluded to the fact that not only is your background on the call amazing, but your actual background in the industry is amazing. How did you first hear about Kory? And also what made you suggest him as a guest?
Quite literally, somebody posted a video of Kory playing a solo on the keyboard forum, on the keyboard corner.
There you go.
I listened to it and I went, wow, who is this guy? I need to go look for his records or something. So I started digging, and his story unfolded as I dove deeper, dived.
Have done.
As I headed deeper into Googledom, I listened to some of his performances. I thought, oh, I got to meet this guy. He's clearly way talented, and yet has there are lots of really great, able craftsmen in our field. It's finding a really able craftsman who understands taste and the role of a session musician, which is completely different from being a solo performer or a live performer, an instrument performer. So it was obvious from what I was hearing. I said, oh, I got to meet this guy.
Yeah, no, great. And so, Kory, I mean, we've talked a little bit about Belmont University. I'm assuming Justin Moore was one of the earlier artists you worked with. So what was sort of the transition from university to actually making your way as either a session or a player or a performer in the area?
That's also a good question. I think, like Steve was talking about, he kind of had his mind set on things that he liked about the piano, like what he wanted to be and what he might not have been drawn to so much. I was actually pretty set that I wouldn't spend too much time touring as an assignment. I kind of always wanted to do some piano artistry things in the studio. I always was fascinated with studio musicians. I love performing live and I love country music. So in hindsight, that made zero sense to not want to go on the road and do that. But I had heard enough stories from some of my predecessors that made the road not sound very appealing. Now, in hindsight, I just don't think there's a way you can be the studio musician that you need to be without at a young age experiencing the music that is translating and connecting with people. So I'm glad that I did it. But what got me my junior year of school, I was just gigging on Broadway, and he came in and said, "Hey, I just signed a record deal, and I'm going on tour with Skinner. You want to come?" And I'm like, "Well, that sounds way cooler than math tomorrow at 9 a.m. Sure, let's go do it." So went, did it. It was amazing. Come back, finish school, somehow piece all that together. We had a great 12-year run on the road. Those guys were all wonderful. One of my close friends from East Kentucky is in the band still, and I learned a lot about Nashville, learned a lot about the radio scene. I learned a lot about the studio from that. I got to mimic parts from other great piano players that were on Justin's records. I was on a few of Justin's records. So it was a great learning experience.
And how did you go balancing? I'm pretty sure back in your interview, Steve, you mentioned this, and I know Bobby Ogden did in his, that when you do go touring for a significant period of time, you can lose some traction in the session scene in Nashville. I understand the session scene in Nashville now is radically different to what it was 20 years ago, but did you find the touring, did you lost some traction as far as the local scene, Kory?
When I was touring that extensively, there were a few moments where I was close to saying it might make a bit more sense for me to take the leap and start doing the session thing a bit more consistently. So there were a few times when I started getting calls from probably a lot of Steve's colleagues that I was like, wow, this is really cool. Tommy Harden's calling me to go play a session. This is all. And when they start calling and you can't do it and you're just getting started, that's when your gut just kind of hits the floor and is like, they're probably not going to call back. Thankfully they still do. And it's nowhere near, I think, the land of milk and honey for me in that scene that Steve is probably more in. But I think my experiences in the way have led to the perfect spot for me and the way I'm wired, because I do have aspirations. I still do. I mean, just a few days ago, I did a solo concert in Philadelphia at a cathedral. Just piano. Well, there was a couple of musicians with me, but for the way I'm wired, all those experiences brought me to right here, and I get to use the studio and the creative part of me that makes me tick. And it gets to tap into the little weird quirky stuff. It gets to tap into some of the bluegrass chops and everything, where I'm probably not as equipped as a lot of folks are for certain aspects of the recording industry.
Nashville has always been a little more forgiving of touring, of session musicians touring than Muscle Shoals was. Muscle Shoals, if you took a tour, if Rick Hall called you for a session and you weren't available, he moved on to the next. If you like what the next guy did, he had your seat from then on. So you couldn't do, you just literally couldn't do it there. But in Nashville, even 20, 25 years ago, you had Michael Rhodes toured as much as he wanted. And because he was such a great musician, when he was not available, he was not available. But when he came back and was off the road, he was back to work in the studios. And there are a lot of examples of that. I'm less familiar with, the intricacies of session etiquette nowadays, being, I like to say I'm about as retired as a studio musician gets now. So it may be a little different, but I think it's still a little more forgiving, but it's more forgiving once you're really sort of rock solid established. If you're still trying to break in, if you're still trying, working your way into the session scene, then I can see how it could be a problem to not be available.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, great answer. And Kory, you just mentioned about playing, with a couple of other musicians in a cathedral. I did want to cover some of the amazing sort of different stuff you've done. So, you created partnership with Wordsmith and, Concert for the Human Family. Just tell us about some of those itches that those different collaborations scratch for you and some of the highlights for you in those areas.
That's a good way to put it. We started dreaming that up in 2018, and we were set to take off with it in March of 2020, and we know how that went. And that was part of what I think was going to be a catalyst for me taking the leap off the tour with Justin. Ultimately did. And that also started at a time when just cultural and society and all the things we were experiencing was different. So in 2018, when I was collaborating with Wordsmith, compared to when we finally got to do it, this is right after George Floyd was murdered. And I don't mean to bring those things onto the show, but what you're presenting with your creative partner, and in those spaces, you can't ignore that. And so for me, it was important that we kind of pivot to that being a platform for Wordsmith to share his art and his feelings and everything. And my dad was there alongside us, and the folks in the communications team at the Episcopal Church were really wonderful and all that. I've got a partner in it, also from East Kentucky. He based out here out of New York, Philadelphia, New York. And they took all these beautiful spaces in these Episcopal churches all across the country, big, small, the Trinity Wall Street all the way to the little white church on the hill. And they just wanted everybody from the community to feel welcome to come in and experience music. It scratched technical itches to be able to go into those spaces and to actually find the way to make the sound be something that would translate. That was a big sense of accomplishment right there. But to be able to go in somewhere and play quiet, to play loud and flashy and have the thing, but to be able to sculpt a show and to create a set list that took people on an emotional journey. And then for when you are playing quiet, and a lot of these places have these just gorgeous Steinways. And to be able to open the lid, ask our sound engineer to turn the sound off, and just to let the instrument do its thing, and to have other folks hear instrumental songs and interpret those notes into their own personal stories, that was very fulfilling. And I'm proud that my kids will get to see that, hey, this made no sense logistically, and Dad still felt strongly about it and did it. And so, and we're still doing it. It looks a little different now, but when we're off here with Tyler, our drummer and bass player Rod and Craig, they joined us in a set just a couple days ago, and it was wonderful. I would imagine it would be something like in the heyday, being able to go to a really nice jazz club where people are there for the music and they're tuned in. They've kind of allowed us to turn those sacred spaces into that.
And so the concept for the human family, format, just I think you've explained it really nicely. But someone that comes to one of those shows, what are they're seeing? They're seeing, as you said, spiritual or more nuanced music with some. I believe it's spoken words. Yeah, just talk a little bit about the format.
Yeah, it's hard to describe. Thankfully, somebody a couple of days ago actually said something that summed it up a lot easier. The musical director at the church said, "I didn't hear any genre tonight." He said, "I just heard music." And he said, after the first song or two, I stopped trying to analyze and I just experienced music, which I rarely do. And for me, that's the point. And if you're experiencing music like that, you're also not experiencing any boundaries with your neighbors who's sitting beside you, who might come from a completely different background or is enter into the musical experience from a different spot. So it's definitely not about getting folks in and trying to cram a message down their throat. There aren't altar calls. There's not anything like that, but it is a deeply spiritual experience. Now, when I say it's also full of humor, it's just not all heavy. We did Rolling in a Sweet Baby's Arms for 10 minutes the other night, just fast as we could. The hands were about to fall off. But at the same time, it's a platform for us to talk about some things that might be just a little more difficult to talk about in a jazz club, and hopefully leave folks feeling inspired to go out and just love their neighbor a little bit more than they did before they come in.
Yeah, great. And as a player, and you mentioned, sometimes you get access to some great Steinways. Did you have to adjust anything in your playing style to meet the format of that show?
That was one of my favorite parts of that, is that I did not. So I come into it from this quirky Appalachian country gospel piano background. Wordsmith came into it from this Baltimore hip hop spoken word theater. He also does orchestral collaboration. And when we bring in other musicians, they would come in from wherever it was. They were coming in for a lot of studio musicians would join us. Like, everybody got to play like themselves, not for the sake of, but we just found that when we were very true to how we play, it sounded the best and it made the most sense. If I'm trying to play like somebody from Baltimore who Wordsmith is used to playing from, you're going to sniff that out and it's going to sound stupid. So thankfully, me playing the way I play, and him doing things the way if he tried to be country or, thankfully we got to stay very true to ourselves, and that was just the best version of the show.
And I do want to talk, Kory, about you've done some other amazing collaborations, Pam Tillis, and I apologise, this is my Australian. Is it Blessing Offer or Offer?
Yeah. Oh, for
Of oh 04, yeah, of course. So just tell us about both those as somewhat different, and the Human Family too, just as something a little different again.
Yeah, they joined us in that series a lot too, and I've found myself being just in the room with people who are less enthralled with the Nashville factory scene, and like some folks, some things are a product and some things are musical, and I don't mean I'm not bitter towards either of them. I like being part of all of it, and but I've found myself more in the room with folks like Miss Pam, who will come to the house and we'll go down rabbit holes of just the wildest records and say, well, let's try this. What if we did this? And I would play something or a funky jazz chord, and she's, oh, that's nice. What if we did it here? And it's just folks who are constantly pushing. I don't know, Steve, if you ever got to work with Pam.
Yeah, I did several records with her.
But,
yeah, back in.
Okay.
Yeah, she's a pistol. She was always sweet and always fun to work.
Very cool. Well, and Blessing is a wonderful piano player too. A great songwriter. He went to Belmont as well, so we met there. So I'm working with folks, and we recorded with both of them. We performed with a lot of them, and they're not folks who you can just phone in a hang with. You're challenged every time because they care so much about the music, and they're okay to push the envelope, and they're okay to try things. And we'll go. This Pam is especially. We would go as far as you can possibly go until you're like, let's take a step back, and then that's where we're at. I don't know. This might be different for this phase in her career. I don't want to speak too much for her, but being around Pam especially has been just huge for my musical mindset and growth.
And you've raised a good point there about being stretched at times. I mean, in your career to date, Kory, when have you felt the most stretched, and how has it changed, how you've learned and evolved as a player?
I'd love to hear Steve's answer on this too, because it probably comes from a much more experience, and I can't imagine. Well, honestly, one of the solos that I think somebody had asked about in the forum on the Tyler record, that I was very stretched there in all of the great ways. And in hindsight, it's really fun to think about how much of your experiences, both musically and environmentally, went into this little 15-20 second snippet of something. Because like I mentioned earlier, with Tyler, there aren't like breaks for solos. Everything is part of this story. And if you look at the lyrics to this song is called Getting to the Bottom, they're hilarious, but they're also pretty deep about just some hangovers and this chapter of life you don't want to go back to. And I'm not equipped to try and translate what the songs are about, because they're just, but he really had a musical moment in mind that he wanted to help tell this story. And his descriptors were like, it's like there's a spider on there, and it's got all these legs, and it's just doing these icky things, and it's tense, but it's also got some moments where you're like, you're sane, but then you're screwed up again. And then all these, and Tyler's a brilliant musician, a great guitar picker, great fiddle player as well. So he's also able to speak the language. For this one, he was using songwriter, and Nick Sanborn, who was there, they're also doing some production with Mr. Rubin and everything. He was the one coming out from behind the desk after a take and saying that was a little too out. What about this? So it was this team of people, all, for the lack of hell, no pun intended, getting to the bottom of the solo on Getting to the Bottom. And after I go back and listen to it, had I not been on tour with Tyler and seen the visuals and lived with those guys and understood how they think about things, had I just gone into making that record, I would have played something completely different. Yeah. I don't know if it would have been right or not, but having that understanding of folks and knowing that you're expected to stretch and you're encouraged to stretch. And it's such a pivotal moment that I'm and this is, I'm in no way making a comparison with a Steely Dan record in anything that I'm doing, but you watch those documentaries and you see them, just the process of getting to pick the solo on Peg or something like that, and the thought that went into it, and then every little detail, how important it was. Well, I approached it like that. I'm like, well, this is one of the cooler records that's going to come out in a long time. Here's Tyler, who I would consider the voice of our generation, honestly, and Mr. Rubin in there, and they're like, here's this solo. And I'm like, okay, this can't just be licks. And there's a microscope on you. And, Steve has been there a million times, but for me, that one had it wasn't high expectations, but he really wanted something out of it. And we figured it out. And that was cool. And after we figured it out, I walked back in. The guy said, "That's really cool. Can you double it on harpsichord?" and of course, I said, "Oh yeah," but on the inside, I'm like, "Oh God." You've probably been there as well, Steve. But
well, you refer to it as being stretched as a keyboard player, but it's all mental. I think the stretch is mental. You're being asked to play something that might not have occurred to you on your own, for starters. And, I mean, the essence of the job of a session player is to read the artist, to figure out what is this artist trying to say to a listener? What is it they're trying to get across to whoever's going to listen to these records? And then do everything you can to not just move that along, but to help them achieve that in perhaps an even better way than they would even imagine on their own. Now, so when an artist wants a particular performance or type of solo, I've certainly been challenged physically in terms of chops and playing on many occasions. If I show up and it's a strict Southern gospel session, I'm in a fair amount of trouble. It's because, I grew up a little Jewish boy in upstate New York. That stuff doesn't come to me naturally. It's the mental challenge of understanding why the artist wants this. And sometimes, I mean, you're going to have plenty of stories, like I've had, where you're in the studio with somebody who's high or who's drunk. I got asked to reproduce the sound of an Appalachian French horn once. I got asked, I had an artist, Mink DeVille, looked straight at me and he said, that sound when you're laying in a field of poppies and the sun comes out from behind the clouds, and he laid out this long story that made no musical sense whatsoever. You have to figure out what is it he's after. He wanted the sound of 1,000 Germans marching across Poland on one song. You got to figure out, if you're a session musician, your job is to figure out what are they wanting to hear, and try and give it to them.
I'm sure there's a general MIDI patch somewhere, Steve, for 1,000 Germans marching across Poland somewhere. You both raised really, really good points about interpreting what the artist wants. And Kory, I'm interested, the polar opposite of that is when you're doing your own work. And I know you did self-fund your own album, Tree of Life. What was that like after, spending so much time working with other artists and interpreting what they're after versus doing basically what's an open sky for you, doing what you want to do?
It kept me in check. No, if I had a chance to go back and do that record again, which everybody, would say, I would think less about the if-thens. And, well, if I do it like this, here's who the label is, here's what they can probably do with this. So being around other artists helped me to be able to compartmentalize the sound of that record and to be calculated in why things were what they were. But I don't think that the best performances or arrangements or textures came out as a result of that mindset. But it it did teach me how to stay in certain parameters. Now, honestly, what we're doing with Tyler, I should note that it's also pretty foreign from the Nashville getting to what an artist wants to experience. None of us would ever take advantage of this, but he also encourages you to be your own artist. And more often than not, he will say, do you, man? That's what you're here for. Like, how does this sound to you? Do you like it? That's cool. So there's a, there's a freedom there, and it's less of freedom and it's more of an encouragement to be yourself, and that's why you're in that band at the time, more so than the typical studio hired hand experience.
Well, I can't speak to the live performance aspects, but certainly as a studio musician, there, if you're good at your job, over time, people understand. I like what that guy does. He's got better ideas than I do, or I'm going to hire him because I like the way he played on this or that, or he or she played on this or that. And you reach a point where you are left to be you. I'm incredibly pleased to have, at some point in my career reached that point where the people who hired me were hiring me because they wanted me to do whatever I thought was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Strictly as a session musician, that's a great point to reach.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Not that I'm a session player by any stretch. I'm interested, Kory. I've mentioned a range of people you worked with, but I'm interested in if your call out of other artists I may not have talked about yet that have been a real inspiration for you, or again may have stretched you or changed your view on how music can be done. Any of those that you would call out?
Yeah. There's a gentleman named Chester Thompson. I don't know if you've ever worked with Chester. He's a drummer. Chester was in Zappa's band and Weather Report, Genesis. He's widely known for the drum duets with Phil Collins. Chester, that's a hard one to answer because he is also so much to just in all the beautiful ways to try to explain and describe. But he put me in touch with the significance of the opportunity to make music for a living. And there were times I was working on some of my own music with him playing and mentoring and just being in the room. Sometimes he'll be in there and he's not even the drummer, but he's in the room, and then everybody just stops, lays down the red carpet and is like, what? I think it was cool. Chester, is it like just guru? And one time I was worried about a solo or performance, and Chester says, well, I don't know why you think you need to do no more than that. Those notes come from somewhere more important than us, and those notes are good enough. The notes are good enough. You need to get out of their way. And so seeing the value that he places on the opportunity to make music and how much he appreciates every note, every rhythm, and how much gratitude he has for every single thing that he plays. And this is a guy who's in some of the coolest bands that have ever existed. And to him, he's humbled every time he gets to make music with anybody on any level. So he's been one of the more just monumental figures in all of my circle.
Yeah, no, to say the least. Do you ever run across Chester, Steve?
I've not worked with Chester. I think we met once. I don't even remember where, but no, I haven't been lucky enough to be in a studio with him.
Yeah, no, amazing guy. And Kory, I know you're only relatively early into your career. You've got many years of career left, but I'm interested in your thoughts on any guidance for younger players just starting out based on your experience. As I said, the industry is constantly changing. There's certainly some big challenges in its future with AI and other stuff. Just interested in your perspective more broadly on the industry and how you would try and make a living if you were just starting today.
Yeah. I'm probably less equipped to give advice and more equipped to share the things people have shared with me and pass those along, the things that I've learned. One of my old business partners, a guy named Mark Costanzo, said something one day, and these are in no particular order. He said, you don't get what you deserve in this industry, you get what you negotiate. And really what he was saying was you have to equip yourself to be able to negotiate well. So you can't just say, no, I want 10 grand for this project instead of 5. You have to have positioned yourself in a way to have warranted that. And then you have to be aware of the fact that it's okay to negotiate and to kind of leverage yourself in the industry based on how you have stacked your own deck. Another one of my favorite things, I read it in a Pat Metheny biography, uh, was he had encouraged young musicians to not think of, if I only had a record deal than this, if I only did all these big things. He said, what can you stop reading right now and go do in the next 10 minutes? There's a little step towards your bigger goal, and keep thinking in those increments. Can I practice more? What can I take control of right now while keeping this vision in mind? I think probably if there's anything personal that I would share, it would be, don't lose the part of it that is fun. In Nashville, it was too, so many times cats will say, well, I'm working today. Yeah, I've got a lot of work coming in. It's great. I've got a lot of work. And I'm like, man, we ain't working. My papa on mine, Cole, he was working.
Yeah.
We're playing instruments, so I would just encourage folks it's cool to be busy and doing those things, but don't forget we ain't really working. We're getting to play something.
Well, I might say that sometimes we're working, but our tools were a lot more fun than your papa.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's
Yes.
right.
That's
Well
a
put.
great way to put it.
And I wasn't planning on asking this, but you just said something that, Kory, that prompts me to ask it. And I can't emphasize, I'm not talking about dollar figures here. I'm just talking about trends, definitely not mentioning dollars. But for both of you, have you seen the pay drop over the years as less records have been made? Well, you know what I mean, as far as in studios and session work, but also the performance side of things, sideman gigs. Without mentioning dollars, just are you seeing that the pay is about the same or it has dropped off? I'll start with you, Kory.
I prefer to start with Steve on this one, if you're okay, because
Yeah, please.
he's got a lot more years. I do have a
Yeah,
perspective on it, but I'd like to hear
yeah,
Steve.
Well, I had the incredibly good fortune to have arrived in Nashville just as the popularity of country music was skyrocketing, and Jimmy Bowen sort of opened the door for the better or the best of the studio musicians to be paid. Jimmy Bowen argued there's 400 guitar players trying to do sessions in this town. 10 of them deserve more money than the other 390. And he argued, that sort of sums up his
yeah,
attitude. And I found myself very quickly working on the records with all of the quote unquote double scale session musicians. So I assumed, well, I'm clearly, I'm of the same value to this producer. And so I was here at the time when record pay for sessions was higher than it's ever been.
yeah,
And, without getting into the whole, it started at Napster and LimeWire and all of that. And we all know what happened to the public's impression of the value of music plummeted. Double scale went away pretty much. The union tried to keep up with the sort of the downward slide of the value of music by creating lower scales that let people make records still on a union contract. It helped the union in that they still got to collect work dues and pension contributions, but it didn't help the musicians. It just kind of took the bottom out from under musicians on what record
yeah,
paid. This is a much tougher time
yeah,
to make a living as a studio musician. When in the 1990s, late 80s, 90s, even 2000s, Tony Brown or James Stroud was producing a record. They would book all double scale musicians for 10 to 15 sessions across 5 days to get to record the album.
yeah,
Now a typical recording session will record anywhere from 2 to 5 songs in 3 hours. The rosters at the labels are much smaller. So there's just a lot. It's a lot harder to become, make a living and feed your family as a session musician.
No, thanks, Steve. And Kory, I assume that matches your experience as far as now?
Well, I never got to experience the double scale days and those kind of things, but I think even I saw it coming, and so I started to try to diversify and kind of put some stock into myself as artist. I saw how my music was sounding at the time, so my manager and we also linked up with Yanni's manager at the same time to kind of make sure we had a footing in that world, and there were and I wanted to do those things regardless. But to Steve's point, I think in addition to the decrease that you're seeing in rates and everything, unfortunately, you're seeing a decrease in quality too, and that's just economics. It's not because people are less talented, but the culture is a little funny right now because a lot of us in town, we're all kind of in this industry bubble, and we're all kind of lying to ourselves. Like people will make a record and say, man, that was great. And like, yeah, well, relatively for the last few years, maybe. But there's no way that you can draw out the best of people and get to the bottom of what these songs are about and get the performances that you want when you're throwing it all together that quickly. Now, in fairness, if you're running a label or if you're an artist or it's either do that or do nothing because you can't afford to do it. So I don't blame anybody for doing that. Thankfully, I just happened to have landed somewhere where we got to make records where you still go and hole up and you do 20 sessions for the record and you stay in the house and everything. But it's so rare. I can't imagine that existing anywhere. And I do see a little hope that there are enough artists that we're around, and I see that I haven't heard on the radio, that I don't see doing publicity, and enough people are buying their tickets and buying their records that I'm like, man, it can still, we can still come out of this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a great.
I think my experiences and Kory's are really two different tracks. I wanted to be a session musician from the moment I started listening to records and analyzing what is going on in how are these being done? So I've strictly pursued being a session musician. I see Kory as an artist who also plays on, who almost guests on people's records. And it is a different track, but I agree that, I don't want to be the old guy who sits here and goes, the music was better when back in my day. But we've had clearly a titanic size shift in what youth perceives music to be. And, when I was young, music was something that came into your ears only. And I think, we're a couple of generations in now to people who think of music as an accompaniment to a visual art form. And it's just different. It's, people are looking at records. They're watching the videos. The route to a successful artist career is often through visual media, through TikTok and through,
that's right.
Eventually through, through videos. It's a different time, and I don't see it going back, but I do think it's had a negative effect on the quality of music released commercially.
And I just very briefly, Steve, I know you did in recent months sessions with Brandon Flowers, and again, I understand you may not be able to give details, but did you find the amount of time you spent on that session would have been overall lower than had that been booked 20 years ago, or because Brandon's obviously extremely well-known international artist, has probably, some money to spend, that it was sort of a little bit of that more extensive involvement?
No, it was very much like the old days. There was
Yeah.
nobody was watching a clock ever.
Yeah.
We took all the time we needed. We ran the songs over and over and would stop because somebody would think this would be better with if we move this guitar amp over by the kick drum, and we would do that for a while. It was completely like the old days for me.
Yeah, so there you both had a recent experience of that, more extensive recording process, which is great.
Yeah, and he was Brandon's a tremendous songwriter.
He is.
It was, I'm sorry to admit I was not that familiar with the Killers record. This just was a different generation for me. But we got in the studio. His ability with lyrics in particular. He's a great singer.
Yeah.
He writes interesting, appealing melodies, but his mastery of lyrics just blew my mind. I was just so impressed with him.
So, Kory, I do want to ask you, you've done a lot of performances and tours now to date. Is there a memorable on-stage train wreck that you can look back on now and laugh about, where things have gone spectacularly wrong?
Oh, but hundreds, Lord.
Hundreds.
One time I was at the Bluebird, and I was pretty young. And first off, I brought in this giant Kory Triton Extreme 88, which I didn't realize was just way too big for all that, and great musicians. And I'm there because whatever singer was there, her manager was like, no, bring in this young guy, you got to have it. So I'm already like the one they have to clear out space for him, like, oh, there's this kid, and I'm reading the charts twice as fast as they're written. And that happens on the first song, and it's just piano vocals. So we kind of get through, the band comes in. I mean, it train wrecks. And then so you have to stop. And then these cats you look up to are like, okay, we can all go home and talk about what happened at the Bluebird tonight. Kid, you're reading them twice as fast. There's 4 beats per thing, whatever. And that actually hurts more than if you're in a stadium, because in those little rooms, they're paying such close attention.
Sure. Yeah.
And you're a lot more accountable, actually. And so I've had plenty of those. The first show I did with Tyler in Rupp Arena, I guessed, I wasn't like fully in the band, but I sat in on an instrumental, and it's this chicken picking big solo kind of thing. And I had a guest ears pack. I didn't even know that it was my solo. And so there's this arena full of people, and there's this band, and they're all, and I'm like just playing, and I'm smiling, and I realize they're all looking at me like, hello, Earth, Kory. I'm like, oh, dang. And I'd been sitting there like a knot on a log for a minute, not knowing that it was my solo. And then it ends, and you did nothing. I have to go back and tell these guys I'm sorry now, and it was my first thing ever, and I've got to apologize. I'm like, I didn't know. So they're just full of those.
Good one. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. There are a couple of records. I won't name them because it's embarrassing, but I have a little bit of spectrum. I like to call it a little bit of spectrum. My daughter, who has a master's in clinical psychology, there's nothing little bit about it, Dad. I'm aware of 2 records where I was in the band, and the vocalist said, "Take it, Steve," and I didn't hear that.
Yeah.
And the record comes out with "Take it, Steve," and I do nothing.
If I had time, Steve, I'd be trolling through, but you've had too many.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Love it.
Twice.
Kory, we've got 2 final questions, and this one's a hard one. It's a bit of a crystal ball one, but what do the next 10 years of your career look like?
What's also fun to think about how I would have answered that 10 years ago. I plan to appreciate every second of where I'm at right now with these guys. I see that, I'd be fine to die of a heart attack on stage out here at 110 or whatever. I see myself letting go of some music that I've been working on for about 5 or 6 years that I've just been too self-conscious to release. And I see myself finally finishing those, being mindful of what it means for a listener, but not worrying about the implications of it. I see myself starting to let go of music that has just been on my heart for a while and sharing it.
Great.
And from there, I'm not as hung up on what happens after that
Yeah.
as I would have been.
No, good perspective. That means flexibility. And I've got to ask the dreaded Desert Island Discs question to you, Kory. So it's partly selfish, but our listeners, we have a massive playlist on Apple Music and Spotify of all our guest selections. So 5 albums that have really made a difference in your life.
Pat Metheny Group, The Way Up. If you're not familiar with that, and you hear something new every time, and I would stand by the fact that I think that is the most brilliant composition in recording in the modern era. I really believe that. It's 45 minutes of 3 chapters and an introduction based on a 3-note, Lyle Mays called it a 3-note cluster. And they just take it to places that just make you feel alive and remind them of just the human experience. And I don't know how they do it live, but they did. Oscar Peterson tracks.
Wow.
His piano sounds like it was recorded this year. It's an Oscar Peterson recording, but it's a very clean, warm, lush piano recording, and Oscar is Oscar on it. There is a bootleg recording that somebody brought into my dad that we think is Billy Preston. It's 10 songs. It's piano and organ. I'm pretty certain it's Billy Preston. And it's just 10 gospel songs with the Hammond organ played exactly how a Hammond organ is supposed to be played. Nothing more, nothing less. And I don't have a name for the record. And I'm probably not at liberty to even share it, but I hear something new and inspirational every time I hear that. This one might come with a stigma, and I don't care, but Yanni Live at the Acropolis. I think that the whole thing was he pioneered something in that makes me want to develop my own ideas more every time I hear that record. And I want to collaborate with bigger ensembles every time I hear it. And I want to approach the piano in a more lyrical way every time I hear it. Because the way he does the solo piano things on that, it's very Mozart-like. I've heard through the grapevine that he doesn't like the term new age, and has been quoted as saying that's what you listen to when you vacuum your house, So I think he is a much more brilliant musician than the aura that we've kind of placed on him as a society. And then here come the Noisemakers, Bruce Hornsby.
Yeah. Yeah, great picks. Someone just recently chose "Here Come the Noisemakers" too, and I've been listening to it recently. Hadn't listened to that before. Just an amazing album. Yeah. Look, Kory, I cannot thank you enough. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. And again, Steve, I can't thank you enough for making the suggestion. It's always a pleasure talking to professional Nashville musicians, sitting all the way over here in Australia, even though most of our audience is in the US and Canada. It's a real privilege hearing some of these stories, and I can't wait to see what comes next for you, Kory. I think you've got an amazing career yet to be lived out.
Well, it's an honor that fan. I can't believe I got to connect with Steve. I used to open up the CDs, go to Walmart and get them, and like, who's on this? Who are these people and stuff? And here's one of them right here, and we're going to talk shop. So thank you for connecting us. Thank you, Steve, for linking up. I'm adamant about taking you up on that lunch date.
Yeah, you should.
We have to do that.
And there we have it. I hope you enjoyed that. As I mentioned in the intro, that was something a little bit different. What a privilege to have Steve Nathan back on the show, let alone hearing about the amazing career that Kory's had to date. And as we said, he's got lots more to come. So I cannot thank both of them enough for joining us. Obviously keen to see Kory down under again. This little cover band keyboard player from Australia always feels a little bit in awe of these amazing musicians, and rightly so, because their chops are to die for. So yeah, cannot thank them both enough. And I also cannot thank you enough for continuing to listen and join. We do super appreciate it. And we're always keen to hear from you, so you can always reach out to us at editor@keyboardchronicles.com. We are on all the socials. We're on Facebook and we're on even TikTok. We're on Blue Sky, you name it. And we're obviously on YouTube too. You can obviously interact with the YouTube channel now. There's a whole community section there. And we're also on Reddit, so that's something new. So if you look for Keyboard Chronicles on Reddit, you will find there's a subreddit for the Keyboard Chronicles. We've just started putting a few little bits and pieces from the vault on there, so would love to interact if Reddit's your thing as well. Last but most definitely not least, I want to give a shout out to our gold and silver supporters, the brilliant Dewey Evans from the sunny land of Wales. Thank you, sir, as always. I was listening to some of your music on a road trip on the weekend, and it's always a pleasure listening to it. Tammy Catcher from Tammy's Musical Stew. Thank you so much, Tammy, for your long-term and ongoing support. It's always enormously appreciated. And the amazing Mike Wilcox at Midnight Mastering. Cannot thank you enough, sir. And if you have your own creations you want mixed and mastered in an extremely professional way for a decent price, Mike is the guy to reach out to. And again, last but not least, Dave Bryce and the team at the musicplayer.com forums. That's where Steve Nathan and I met, and it's still a wonderful place to hang. So highly recommend the Keyboard Corner and the musicplayer.com forums. So we'll be back again in a couple of weeks. And Paul does send his regards. Paul, it's not as if we've, thrown Paul off a cliff somewhere. He's been incredibly busy, and I'm very jealous, actually. He's living the life of an incredibly busy gigging musician. He actually was in my hometown over the last couple of weeks, and we caught up for a beer, and I went to see his amazing show. He's definitely still part of the team. He's just so damn busy, but he'll be back soon. So again, thank you for listening. And until we talk next time, keep on playing.